So, all right. And then, Zach, our last topic. And then if you want to bring anything else up, you certainly can. But I want to have a real, honest conversation about James Franklin. So, James Franklin, when he loses this game to Marcus Freeman, you could argue that James Franklin lost the game for him. As I pointed out earlier, I think there was a whole lot more that happened in this game, more than just James Franklin losing the game in the fourth quarter. As a Penn State guy pointed out in the chat, once again, it's happened time and time again now. And then, so he has that happen. But this is also a situation where Penn State had arguably the easiest path to get to the semifinals. Now, I don't really subscribe to this theory. I do think that, you can't say like exactly, I don't know, like I want to give credit to James Franklin for winning playoff games, right? But at the same time, he also faced a group of five team and a team that was group of five last year and had a rather easy ACC schedule to get to the ACC championship game and then wasn't punished when they lost. So, I mean, SMU probably deserved to be in the playoffs, but I could definitely see an argument for an Ole Miss or somebody like that getting in over them. So for me, like I have to acknowledge those things when I'm talking about James Franklin. But at the same time, I can't be one of those people that just says James Franklin, he didn't get any wins in the playoffs, and this does nothing, and he's the same old that we saw before. What are your thoughts?
I think the legacy question is so hard. It's funny. I've been at a conference with our ministry, and a number of them are Penn State fans, and a lot of them are ready to see James Franklin go. And it's because of the manner in which he loses. And I think it's very similar. Again, I think it's very similar to the Ryan Day conversation several weeks ago when he lost to Michigan, which is they want him to be a national championship. They want Penn State to be a national championship contender at least once every 10 to 20 years. And by contender, I mean actually win it. And I think the reality is the ceiling for James Franklin has been in like 6 to 10 range, where you're good, you can be really good, and even sometimes you can upset a top tier team. But in reality, you always tend to come up short, and you kind of come up short in ways where you shoot yourselves in the foot. And I think that's the difficulty with not just that they lost this game, it's the way they lost. And I think you have to balance that, though, with the 12-team world with Penn State. The 12-team playoff world with Penn State is they're going to get in more often than not now. And so James Franklin is going to get in. He's going to get more playoff wins, I think, because he's probably going to play more teams in that 9 to 12 range. And those are the teams that he can beat. I think they have a really good roster coming back next year. They could probably make it far next year. But I think to your point, they're going to beat teams that are group of five or lower rated in the Power Five. And does that actually satisfy what Penn State's looking for? And I don't think so. And so it's just hard because it's like, do you fire somebody? And I think that's the real question. Do you fire James Franklin? Do you fire someone for being in the 10 to 6 range with the possibility to maybe sometime get over the hump? Or do you say, let's start from scratch and then possibly take some time to get back into that 12-team race, which it will take time because the Big Ten's getting better. Like Oregon's not going away. Michigan certainly is not going away. Ohio State's not going away. And then you have other teams who are elevating. Illinois is elevating, right? Minnesota is elevating. You still have to deal with USC and Washington. And so Penn State, if the 12-team world were here and they just had to deal with Michigan and Ohio State, then I think, okay, like let's go out and get somebody. But the problem is in the 12-team world, Franklin can make the playoff probably 4 out of 5 years and probably win a playoff game 2 or 3 out of 5 years. Do you really want to lose that with the possibility, like, do you want to possibly lose that by getting a new coach and starting from scratch? That, I think that's the big conundrum that Penn State's under right now. But I know for sure that they're tired of this, and I think they should be. Like, I think this was,
Yeah.
as much as I hate to say it, like, because I like Drew Allar, I like James Franklin. I think James Franklin gets a bad rap, but as I've said on this show and on my show, at some point you are who you are. And whereas Marcus Freeman has changed, James Franklin really hasn't. His results haven't changed. And I think that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, I mean, like with Marcus Freeman, you saw the gradual change, right? You still saw him struggle. Like, what was it? His first year or second year, he loses to Marshall, and you're like, okay, well maybe he can grow from that. Well, this year he loses to Northern Illinois. You're like, okay, well this guy still struggles coming off a big game, beating inferior opponents, but you also saw him take down an Indiana team that looked good all year. I know there's a lot of people that argue they shouldn't have been there, but guess what? They were there and they won 11 games that season. So he beat that team. Then he goes on and he beats Georgia. Like, I don't think we're having this conversation if Penn State had beaten Indiana and Georgia. I think this conversation comes up because you had James Franklin be so close to beating Ryan Day at home, and then he falls short. He came really close to beating Dan Lanning, and then he falls short. He comes really close to beating Marcus Freeman, and then he falls short. Like, to me, like, James Franklin has been considered a top 10 coach for a while now, but it feels like with every coach that he passes, somebody else passes him. And I think that's where the frustration comes with Penn State fans more than anything else. You're seeing these other coaches improve and get better and be thought of better, but you don't see that as much with James Franklin. It's kind of like he's just sticking at that same 8 or 9 spot, and Dan Lanning passes him up. But who's the guy from Florida State? What's his name?
Norvell.
Norvell goes behind him. Yeah, Norvell. Norvell goes behind him, but Dan Lanning passes him up, right? Somebody else goes behind him, but then you have Marcus Freeman pass him up. Like, I get it. I get why Penn State fans are so annoyed. But at this point, like, this is almost like in the NFL, right? Where you're middle of the pack every year. It's like the Steelers with Mike Tomlin, right? Like, they don't think they're going to win a Super Bowl with Mike Tomlin, but Mike Tomlin also never has losing seasons. So you can't really get rid of the guy, but you also are not confident you're ever going to achieve the mountain with the guy. And that's kind of where James Franklin is at right now. You know James Franklin isn't going to fall off and have a 5-7 or a 7-5 season, right? You know that's not going to happen. But at the same time, you also know if you get to the semifinals, you're not going to the national championship, right? Like, that, to me, that's where that is the hardest part of this conversation. Your ceiling isn't where you want to be, but the floor isn't low enough that it's unacceptable. It's just right in the middle, and he's going to tease you a little bit some years. It's never going to seem like enough. But I think you have to keep him around.
Yeah. And it's hard because I think it's a similar, again, I keep relating it to Ryan Day because we were just talking about it a few weeks ago with Ohio State, Michigan. The difficulty with both of these coaches, and it's going to be, I think if Ryan Day wins tomorrow, it's a moot point, right? But I think the conversation surrounding both coaches is not, hey, are they good coaches? They are. They are. Like James Franklin, I really hate the rhetoric around James Franklin because I think he is a top 10 coach in this industry. And I think he's a darn good coach. I think he's a darn good recruiter. But the problem is, like, if you want to win a national championship, the one thing you have to do is elevate. And he has just not – he has gotten them to a plateau that they've just stayed stagnant. And you even saw it with Kotelnicki. Like, I don't think he knows how to unleash Kotelnicki, but maybe even more so, I think the team takes on his demeanor. And I think you saw some of those nerves tonight with Drew Allar. Like, I think Drew Allar, I think some of the rest of the team, they played nervous. They didn't play up to their ability. And you're like, ugh. And I think we've seen evidences of that even the first two playoff games. And those weren't stiff competition, as you alluded to. They were good. Like, I think you got to give credit to Boise. You got to give credit to SMU, but they're not the elite teams that Penn State is craving to beat.